The scream was still ringing in my ears when my father threw my suitcase onto the front lawn. It landed with a dull thud on the frozen grass, the clasp popping open and spilling my clothes, my entire life, onto the frostbitten ground. The January wind cut through my hoodie like it was made of paper, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching the contents of my world scatter like trash. 18 years, my mother's voice came from the porch, sharp and brittle as the ice on the driveway. 18 years we gave you, Mara. And this is how you repay us. My younger brother, Dylan, stood behind her in the doorway, his phone held up at an angle that made my stomach twist. He was recording. Of course he was. He had that smirk on his face, the one that always appeared right before he delivered the final blow of whatever game he was playing. It wasn't me, I said, but my voice came out in a croak. The lie was so obvious even I didn't believe myself. I didn't take the money. $6,000 from my home office, Dad said, stepping forward to block any path back inside. The porch light caught the gray at his temples, making him look older, harder. A stranger. It didn't just grow legs and walk away. I've never stolen anything in my life. You know that. You have to know that. You're the only one who knew about the safe, Mom said. The only one who knew about Grandpa's coins. You and your father. And Dylan, I whispered. Don't, Dylan said, lowering his phone just enough to roll his eyes. Don't you dare drag me into this. I was at Jake's all weekend. I have like 10 witnesses. We checked his bank account, Dad said quietly. Your brother hasn't deposited a single cent. Yours, on the other hand, has a $1,000 deposit made the day after the coins went missing. Cash. In person. The teller confirmed it. The ground tilted beneath my feet. What? We're not stupid, Mara. Did you think we wouldn't check? I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. Because I had made a deposit that weekend, $1,000 in cash. But it wasn't stolen. It was my savings, money I'd been hoarding for months from my part-time job at the coffee shop, tips and paychecks stashed in a shoebox under my bed. I'd finally taken it to the bank because the shoebox was ripping. I'd told my dad about it the week before. He'd nodded and said it was smart to put it away for college. But now that deposit looked like guilt. I earned that money, I managed. Every single dollar. I have pay stubs. I can show you. Pay stubs that don't account for cash tips, Dad said, shaking his head. You could have hidden anything. We've been over this. It's time for you to go. Go where? It's 11 degrees outside. I don't have a car. I don't have a place. I'm supposed to start classes next semester. You can't just, please. Give me one night to figure this out. This is the consequence, Mom said, and for the briefest moment, something flickered behind her eyes. But then Dylan shifted behind her, his phone still raised, and her expression hardened. Actions have consequences, Mara. I looked at my phone, still clutched in my frozen fingers. 3 missed texts from my best friend, Harper. A low battery warning. No money in my checking account beyond the $20 I had for emergencies. I knew how this story ended for girls like me. I'd read the statistics. And as I stood on that frozen lawn, watching my family close the door on me, I thought this was the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. Because the next morning, when a lawyer called to tell me about my grandmother's will, I discovered that my parents had been hiding something from me for 18 years. The truth wasn't just a betrayal. It was the kind of secret that would bring our entire family to its knees. If you love emotional family stories filled with betrayal, secrets, and unexpected twists, make sure you subscribe to Broken Trust Stories. We bring you powerful news stories like this every day. Now, let's get back to what happened. Against the headboard. Renting out, I repeated. The house on Maplewood. It wasn't sold. No, Ms. Callahan. The deed was never transferred. It remains in your grandmother's name, pending final probate. But the rental income, over $3,000 per month, was collected by your parents. We'll need to discuss that as well. I don't remember ending the call. I remember Harper taking the phone from my trembling hands. I remember her mother coming in with soup, her face full of questions. And I remember the inside of my grandmother's house, how it had smelled like lemon polish and fresh bread, how the wooden floors creaked in the hallway, how she'd told me once that everything she had would be mine someday. I'd thought it was just something grandmothers say. I had no idea how much my parents had been stealing from me. I had no idea the lies they had told to cover it up. And I had no idea that my grandmother's house contained evidence that would destroy the entire facade. But I was about to find out. Birthday. You turned 18 last month. My heart hammered. So where is it? It's at the bank, Andrea said. I've been trying to contact you for weeks. You haven't answered. I called your parents 6 times. They told me you'd moved away, that they didn't have your new contact information. They never told me you called, I said, the truth settling like ice in my veins. They were trying to keep me from finding out. Andrea's expression softened, just slightly. That's what I was afraid of. Ms. Callahan, I've been doing this job for nearly 3 decades. I've seen families do terrible things over estates. But your grandmother, she was a smart woman. She knew what your parents might do. That's why she left instructions for me to reach you directly, no matter what. She picked up the folder and pulled out another document, this one covered in my grandmother's neat handwriting. It was dated 6 weeks before her death. This is a summary of the estate, Andrea explained, including an itemized list of every asset, every account. Your grandmother wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity. She wanted you to know exactly what she left you. I read the list, my eyes filling with tears. The assets were extensive, more than I'd ever imagined. Not just the house and the accounts. There was a 401k from her years as a teacher. A collection of savings bonds. A small brokerage account. Life insurance proceeds. But the final line of the page made the tears spill over. And for my Mara Bean, I leave my hope that she knows her worth, even when others try to make her feel worthless. She is my heart. She always has been. Asterisk. Mara Bean. My grandmother had called me that since I was a baby. I hadn't heard it in 9 years. Theirs. It is not. Asterisk. They will tell you I didn't understand what I was doing. I knew exactly what I was doing. Asterisk. They will tell you they spent the rental income on your care, on your education, on your future. They did not. I know because I watched them. I watched them collect the rent and put it into an account that you never benefited from. I watched them lie to you, my sweet girl, even when you were too young to understand the lies. Asterisk. But here's what they don't know. I kept records, receipts, letters, photographs. Every time your mother wrote to me asking for more time to manage things, every time your father called to demand his inheritance early, it's all in this box. The bank records, the rental agreements. Everything. It's enough to prove what they've been doing. It's enough to hold them accountable. Asterisk. Mara, my darling, I know this is a heavy burden for an 18th birthday. I wish I could be there to guide you through it. I wish I could apologize in person for not protecting you from this when I had the chance. But I was dying, and I had to make choices about how to spend my final months. I chose to spend them building a case for you. I chose to spend them making sure the truth survived, even if I didn't. Asterisk. I love you more than I know how to say. I always have. Be brave, my Mara Bean. Use what I left you to build a life worth living. Don't let them take what's yours. Asterisk. Forever your grandmother, Gwendolyn. I read it twice. Then a 3rd time. By the 4th time, I was sobbing, and Harper was holding me while the bank manager hovered uncertainly by the door. The box, it turned out, contained everything my grandmother had promised. Receipts. Copies of rental agreements my parents had signed in their own names. Bank statements showing the account they'd used to collect the rent, the same account they'd told the probate court didn't exist. Letters from my mother to my grandmother, asking for loans that were never repaid. A letter from my father, written the month after my grandmother's death, thanking a lawyer for his help in postponing the inevitable. That last letter became the centerpiece of everything that followed. Because it proved what my parents had done. Not just the theft, not just the lying, but the active, deliberate campaign to keep me in the dark until I was too old and too broken to fight back. But they'd miscalculated. They'd kicked me out at 18, thinking I'd disappear. What they didn't realize was that my grandmother had spent her final months making sure that when the truth came out, it would come out armed with receipts. The first thing I did was put my own legal team together. Andrea Whitfield was technically the estate attorney, but she recommended a family law specialist named Rachel Okonkwo, who had a reputation for being absolutely relentless. Rachel was a tall woman with close-cropped hair and a stare that could cut through steel. She listened to my story in complete silence, then opened a legal pad and began writing. "How much do you want to recover?" she asked when I finished. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your parents have collected over $160,000 in rent from a property they didn't legally own. They falsely contested a will. They committed perjury in probate court multiple times. They've been hiding your inheritance from you for 9 years. How much do you want to recover?" I thought about the night they'd thrown me out. The cold, the fear, the way Dylan had recorded me, a smirk on his face while my world collapsed. I thought about the lies they'd told me my entire life, about how they'd made me feel like a burden, like an expense they could barely afford, while all along they were cashing my grandmother's checks. "All of it," I said. "I want all of it." Rachel smiled, and I understood why people hired lawyers like her. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, depositions, and preparation. Harper's parents let me stay in the guest room, refusing any offer of payment. They fed me, they listened, they sat with me when I cried. They never once made me feel like I was asking too much. And throughout it all, my parents remained silent. They didn't call, they didn't text, they didn't show up at Harper's house demanding to see me. For all they knew, I was still sleeping on a park bench somewhere. Then, 2 weeks after the bank visit, my phone finally rang. My mother's number. "Mara," she said when I answered, her voice clipped and controlled. "We need to have a conversation. There have been developments." "You mean the ones where my grandmother's lawyer finally caught up with me?" A pause. A sharp exhale. "We've received some legal papers. You need to understand that this has all been a misunderstanding. We should meet. We should discuss this as a family." "We're not a family," I said quietly. "You made that pretty clear when you threw me out in the middle of January." Things were heated. We made mistakes. But the estate is complicated. Your father and I were just trying to protect you. Protect me from what? An inheritance. A house. A future. Another pause. I could hear my father's voice in the background, low and urgent, trying to tell her what to say. Then my mother's voice, sharper than before. "How much did they tell you?" "All of it. The will, the rent, the letters, the letter from Dad's lawyer, promising to drag out the probate for as long as possible. Grandma kept everything, Mom. She knew what you were doing, and she left me the proof." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought she might have hung up. Then she said, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear it, "She always liked you best." She hung up before I could respond. That was the moment I realized the betrayal was about to get much, much worse. The next day, a package arrived at Harper's house. There was no return address. The handwriting on the label was unmistakably my father's, blunt, angular, each letter printed with force. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, were the coins. Not all of them, 8 coins, each in a plastic sleeve, along with a note, for the deposit. "Consider it even. Drop the lawsuit. Asterisk." I called Rachel immediately. "They're trying to bribe you," she said. "These are the coins they accused you of stealing. They probably had them all along. Keep them. We can use them as evidence." "But why would they risk sending them to me now?" "Because they know their position is weak. Your grandmother's evidence is devastating. They're trying to make a deal before the judge sees everything." Rachel paused. "There's something else. I did some digging into the property records. The house on Maplewood has been refinanced twice since your grandmother died, once in 2013, and again in 2017. The lender is a private company that specializes in high-interest lines of credit. My parents took out loans against my grandmother's house. They did, and they used it as collateral." Rachel's voice was grim. The real problem is that your parents aren't just fighting you for the house. They're fighting the bank. If we go too hard, the house could end up liquidated to cover their debts. I sat down heavily on the edge of the guest bed. How much? $240,000. There's a balloon payment coming due in 8 months. If they can't pay it, the lender forecloses. Then my grandmother's house is gone. Not necessarily. The estate has enough liquid assets to pay off the loan. But it would eat into your inheritance. And there's still the matter of the rent they collected and the will contest. I stared at the coins on the bed, their gold surfaces dull under the overhead light. Somewhere under my parents' roof, those coins had sat in a safe for years, evidence they'd used against me. And when that evidence failed, they'd tried to turn it into a bargaining chip. They still thought I was a child. They still thought they could control me. Saving and planning. She hadn't built that legacy so I could spend it fighting my parents in court. She'd built it so I could have a life. Make them pay the full rent income, I said finally. No offsets for management fees. They weren't managing anything. They were stealing. And I want a full written admission of what they did, signed by both of them. No NDA. No secret settlements. They don't get to hide what they did. Rachel's eyebrows rose. That's a strong position. They may not agree. Then we go to trial, I said, and I felt my grandmother's strength steadying me. Grandma spent 9 years preparing for this. I can wait a little longer. It took another month, but my parents agreed. The final settlement was read into the record on a Tuesday morning in April. My parents, both of them, stood before the judge and admitted, in writing and on the record, that they had concealed the will, contested its validity under false pretenses, and collected rental income belonging to the estate without authorization. The admission did not include criminal charges, but it was on file. Permanent. Inescapable. The financial terms were simple. Full repayment of the rent income, $162,000, by the end of the year. Immediate transfer of the house on Maplewood. Valuable consideration for the improvements they had made, there were none. No NDA. And the coins. My grandmother's coin collection, the one they'd stolen and used to frame me. It would remain with them. But the house would be mine. The first time I walked into the house on Maplewood as its owner, I was struck by how small it seemed. I'd been 9 years old when I'd last stood in the front hall, hiding behind my grandmother's legs while the grown-ups argued. Then, the house had seemed enormous, a mansion of winding stairs and secret corners. Now it was just a house, a Victorian with bad plumbing and a wraparound porch that needed paint. But it was mine. The tenants, a young couple with a baby, met us at the door. They were nervous, clearly unsure of what the change in ownership meant. I told them I had no intention of raising their rent. They cried. I cried. Harper, ever practical, wrote them a check for their security deposit from her own account, and told them to take the baby for a walk so we could look around in private. This place is amazing, Harper said, running her hand along the banister. It needs work, but the bones are beautiful. Just like your grandma. I smiled, my eyes filling again. I used to think this place was magic. Like, actual magic. The way the light came through those stained glass windows in the morning. The way the floorboards creaked in the hall. It is magic, Harper said, linking her arm through mine. It's your magic. Persistence, stubbornness, and all the receipts an old woman could stuff in a safety deposit box. We explored the house together, and when we reached the attic, I found what my grandmother must have known I'd find. A small trunk, tucked behind the old water heater, covered in dust and cobwebs. Inside, wrapped in a yellowed blanket, were more of her belongings, old photographs, letters from my grandfather during the war, a tiny silver locket with a picture of my infant face inside. There was also a notebook, the kind my grandmother used for her records. The first page read, "When I'm gone, my Mara Bean will come home. She'll know what to do." Asterisk. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Not yet, but I knew I was done being a victim. I was done letting my parents dictate the terms of my life. And I was done pretending that the people who raised me had ever really loved me. Love isn't lies. Love isn't theft. Love isn't leaving your daughter to freeze on a January sidewalk while you count the rent money from a house that was never yours. Love is what my grandmother did, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best, and trusting that someday the truth would come home to roost. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the confrontation or even the months of slowly rebuilding my life. The hardest part was accepting that my parents were never going to be the people I'd wanted them to be. For years, I had made excuses for them. I'd told myself that my father's drinking was a response to stress, that my mother's coldness was just her way of showing love through discipline. I'd believed that Dylan's cruelty was a phase, that someday he'd grow up and we'd be friends. I'd convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, behaved well enough, achieved enough, then my family would finally see me. But the truth was simpler and much more painful. Some people don't see you. They see what they want to see. They create a version of you that serves their own needs, and when that version stops serving, they discard it. Dylan had framed me. I was almost certain of it now. The deposit into my bank account had been made at a branch I'd never visited, by a person matching Dylan's description, at a time when he'd claimed to be at a friend's house. The stolen coins had been hidden in my bedroom closet, planted during one of the many times my parents weren't home. But the exact mechanics didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the choice he'd made. The choice they'd all made. And the choice I was going to make now. I moved into my grandmother's house in June, the day after the tenants moved out. The young couple had found a bigger place across town, and they left a potted lavender plant on the porch as a goodbye gift. I placed it in the window seat where I'd used to read, and watched the way the light caught the purple blooms. The house needed work, a new roof, updated wiring, plumbing repairs, a fresh coat of paint on every wall. But it would always need work. That was the nature of old houses. And I had time. I had money. I had my grandmother's words, written in her careful handwriting in a notebook I carried with me everywhere. Be brave, my Mara Bean. Use what I left you to build a life worth living. Asterisk. I enrolled in classes at the local community college that fall, after a summer spent learning how to strip wallpaper and refinish floors. I didn't know what I wanted to study yet, but I knew it would involve helping other people who'd been wronged by the people who were supposed to love them. Maybe law, maybe social work, maybe something I hadn't even considered yet. What mattered was that I was moving forward. My mother showed up on the porch in October. I was surprised, not by her arrival, but by how little I felt when I saw her. She wore the same navy dress she'd worn to the hearing, and her face was pinched with the same mixture of pride and barely concealed fury. The hydrangeas, she said, gesturing toward the front yard. They're overgrown. Your grandmother would have hated that. Hello, Mom. You changed the locks. Yes. I tried to use my key. For the old door. She held up a small brass key, dangling from a keychain shaped like an anchor. I had it from before. If she expected an invitation, she didn't get one. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, watching her. Behind her, the street was quiet, the trees just beginning to turn. I came to apologize, she said finally. The words seemed to cost her something. Did you? Yes, I did. Your father, he's not doing well. The drinking is worse. Dylan moved out. He's living with friends in Indianapolis, working at a warehouse. The house is too big for just the two of us. She paused. We're going to have to sell it. I waited. Mara, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we're still your family. We made mistakes, but we're still your parents. You kicked me out, I said, my voice steady. You threw my clothes on the lawn in January. You accused me of theft and refused to listen when I told you the truth. You spent 9 years cashing my grandmother's rent checks while pretending I was a financial burden. And now you want to blame the economy for losing the house. I'm not blaming the economy. I'm telling you the truth. We can't afford the mortgage anymore. You might have been able to, if you hadn't had to pay back the money you stole. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. The settlement was on file in the county courthouse, a permanent record of their admissions. I'm not here to fight, she said quietly. I'm here because you're my daughter. I wanted to see the house. I wanted to see that you're okay. I'm okay, I said, and the surprising thing was that it was true. I was okay. Not perfect, not healed, not free from the damage they'd caused. But okay. And now you've seen. You can go. She lingered for a moment longer, her eyes moving over the front porch, the stained glass, the lavender plant in the window. Then she turned and walked back to her car, and I watched her drive away. She didn't look back. The house took 6 years to fully restore. 6 years of weekends, long evenings, and borrowed tools. 6 years of learning how to install insulation, fix a leaky faucet, refinish the original hardwood floors. 6 years of discovering that I was much stronger and more capable than I'd ever thought. During those 6 years, I finished community college and transferred to a 4-year university, where I studied legal studies. I married Harper, not in a romantic way, but in the way of two people who had seen the worst in each other and still chose to stand together. She was my roommate, my confidant, my proof that family isn't always blood. My father died 2 years after the last time I saw him. A heart attack, the death certificate said, but everyone who knew him knew it was the drinking. He died alone in a hospital room, with no family by his side. My mother called to tell me, her voice hollow and distant, and I realized I didn't feel much of anything except a terrible, uncomplicated sadness, not for the man he'd been, but for the man he might have been, if things had gone differently. I didn't go to the funeral. Dylan reached out once, a few years later. He wanted to apologize, he said, for the way things had gone. He was in a bad place, struggling with addiction, struggling with his own bad choices. Part of me wanted to help him. The old Mara, the one who'd stood on that frozen lawn with her clothes scattered across the grass, would have opened the door without hesitation. But I wasn't her anymore. I sent him a card, and then I let him go. On my 26th birthday, I sat on the front porch of my grandmother's house, holding a mug of coffee and watching the sun come up over the hydrangeas. The house was finally finished. Not in the way a decorator would describe. The floors still creaked, the paint wasn't perfect, the old radiators made strange sounds in the winter. But it was mine. It had been mine all along, even when I didn't know it. In the years since my parents kicked me out, I had built a life. Not the life I'd expected, not the life I'd planned for as a teenager. But a good life, a life with purpose and meaning and people I loved. And through it all, I had carried my grandmother's words with me. Be brave, my Mara Bean. Use what I left you to build a life worth living. Asterisk. I was still working on the bravery. Some days were harder than others. Some mornings I woke up with the old fear sitting heavy on my chest, the fear that I would never be good enough, that the people I loved would turn on me the way my parents had. But then I'd come downstairs, make coffee, and sit on this porch, and I'd remember what my grandmother had done. She'd seen the truth of her own son. She'd recognized the danger, and instead of running from it, she'd prepared for it. She'd spent her final months building a case for a granddaughter she would never see grow up, a granddaughter who would need that case more than she could ever know. Her trust in me, her belief that I would eventually find my way home, was the only inheritance I truly needed. The rest of it, the money, the house, the legal victory, those were just the spaces where I could continue to build. I pulled my grandmother's notebook from my pocket and flipped to the last page. She'd written only one line. The truth always comes home. Let it find you ready. Asterisk. As the sun rose over the roof of the little house on Maplewood, I realized it had. I was ready. She had never been able to be. In the morning, I went downstairs, made coffee, and sat on the porch. The hydrangeas were in full bloom now, their rounded heads heavy with blue and purple blossoms. The lavender plant from the young couple had grown into a sprawling bush. The house was quiet and peaceful, and I was home. And I realized, sitting there in the early light, that I had finally gotten what my grandmother had wanted for me all along. Not revenge, not money, not even the house. A life of my own, built on the foundation of her faith in me. A life where I could choose who to let in and who to keep out. A life where I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone, because I finally understood it myself. The truth always comes home. My grandmother had promised me that. And she was right. If this story touched you, make sure you subscribe to Broken Trust Stories for more emotional family stories. shocking secrets, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. New stories are waiting for you every day.